and welcome to Paved with Gold, the eating disorder recovery podcast. I would like to acknowledge the traditional landowners on which Kelly and I are recording and extend the same respect to the traditional custodians of the lands from which you are all listening. As you will know from the title, we are talking about all things exercise and the role it plays in eating disorders and eating disorder recovery. Now, we could not do this topic justice with just the two of us. So we, of course, had to invite a very special guest. Today's guest is an exercise physiologist and personal trainer with over 7 years of experience in the fitness industry. They are the proud owner of Your Movement Space, an exercise physiology movement studio, and has absolutely fantastic hair at all times. Their practice is size inclusive, trauma informed, and comes from a foundation of lived experience with an eating disorder, which is why we are so excited to welcome Ellen Masson.
Hi! Yay! Thank you. Good to be here.
Welcome to the pod.
Yeah.
Very, very excited.
So are we.
It's
been a long time coming.
Yes.
I know. But I always have time to talk about this kind of stuff because it's a real passion area of mine. So I feel really privileged to be able to, share some thoughts and also like my opinions on this space. So I'm very, very excited.
Yeah, so are we.
So I know I named this episode exercise and eating and the role it plays in eating disorders or whatever name I end up naming this episode. But it's that's like a little bit of a clickbaity title, because one thing I am loving seeing is the shift from the term exercise to movement. I'm really vibing it because it is just something I feel that, especially with the toxic industry that is fitness culture, sometimes exercise can often be seen as, and also in eating disorders, exercise can be seen as a punishment. It can be seen as compensatory behavior. It can be seen as something that you have to do, whereas just like movement and something that needs to be counted and tracked and everything.
Yeah.
I love this more like freeing yourself with movement, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, and there's a tangible kind of like definition for exercise, isn't there? Like it kind of looks a particular way, I guess. If we say the word exercise, we think of particular things, whereas like movement can be anything, can't it? Like, rolling on your floor or walking your dog or patting your dog or playing with your child or whatever movement is, which is really cool. Yeah, so I like that.
Yeah, so I'm sure we'll get into that. One of obviously the most important elements of your practice, and something that we hold very dear to our hearts, of course, is the lived experience that you have with an eating disorder. So if it's okay, and if you wouldn't mind, would you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, for sure. And I was thinking about this myself, and I was like, shit, where the fuck do you start with something? I was like, how much history do they want? Like, when?
And it's like, how long you got?
Yeah, this whole podcast could just be an hour.
Oh, honestly, whenever anybody asks me that, I'm just like, what version do we do?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, how PC do we need this to be?
You include whatever you want,
exactly.
or don't want, or like
the floor is yours.
Absolutely, we're here to listen.
I think I'll give a little bit of backstory because I think that it's interesting and you guys would relate to this, like being a provider and understanding the progression of eating disorders much more from a clinical perspective, and then being able to look into your own history and go, holy shit, I understand why I ended up here.
Yeah.
because of all this other stuff. And I feel like that's definitely the case for me. I think I had a lot of risk factors for developing an ED for a long time. Like I had a history of childhood trauma, was neurodivergent. I had a lot of gender-related issues when I was young that I wasn't aware of that was leading to me being very lonely and very ostracized by both boys and girls, because I just didn't really fit in. And so there were a lot of factors there. I was sort of, I wouldn't say that I was like an athlete, because I didn't get to like the level of like representing Australia, but I played netball very seriously and got to quite a serious level of netball. So athletics and exercise was a very like big part of my identity for a very long time. And so even though netball isn't a sport that necessarily focuses specifically on aesthetics, because you're wearing very tight dresses and bodysuits and all of that kind of stuff all the time, and you're around a lot of women who are very athletic and, and very thin, it's like, it's kind of a bit of a more triggering kind of environment. Because also my youngest brother developed type 1 diabetes, and my mum went through this really extreme, like, no carb, no sugar in the house, like no nothing kind of phase, which was like also very like hard to be around retrospectively. I developed this tendency of like, and also because we weren't like poor, like poverty poor, but we didn't have that much money. I used to like go down to the shops and just steal a whole bunch of food and binge on food and then go home because I didn't have anything at home that I wanted to eat or could eat. And I also was trying to cope with all of this other stuff that was going on retrospectively, super avoidant in my attachment style. So I wasn't going to anyone for help.
Yeah. Aren't we all a little bit?
So that was kind of like my base. And then the really fun stuff began, which was when I finished year 12, I what's the right word? I went and did a degree that turned out to not be the right degree for me. It was industrial design, but my whole life was like based around this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do industrial design. That's all my kind of life is kind of geared around. And then it turned out that I wasn't suited to that and I didn't like it.
Sorry, what is industrial design?
It's kind of like product design, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So it's kind of like engineering in product design, basically. So it's like how a product will function, like the design of the product, how the bits go together, like all of that kind of stuff.
I was with a whole bunch of design kids as well. So I did design and visual communications. So they,
right,
the industrial design kids were always off doing things that I was just like, I do not understand anything that you're talking about.
But I dropped out because it was really not for me in the end. And I was really at a loss for what I was going to do. And my mum suggested, which had positives and negatives. My mum suggested, hey, like you've been athletic all your life, like, maybe you should just go get a job in a gym or something, like be a receptionist, just while you're sorting out your shit, like maybe that would be like a good environment for you to be in. And I was kind of like, oh, that actually sounds like a good idea. That sounds decent. And so that's actually what I did. I ended up working in one of the big commercial gyms in Australia in like sales and reception. And it's really, it's interesting seeing how people are affected by, gym culture just by being someone who's going in and out of there every now and again. It's a completely different story when you're actually working there, and also the kind of comments that people feel like they can make about you because you work in a gym, and they feel like you owe them some level of fitness or beauty or strength or whatever it is, in order to just exist in the space, even though I became a PT later, but I wasn't even that at this stage. Not that there should be those connotations around those people either, but like...
Yeah. I remember I worked on the reception at a major gym for a very long time, and I kind of went between a few different ones for like years and years. And I can relate. I remember one I interviewed for because I was, wanting a change in my reception gym life. I remember I interviewed for, and the requirements was that I was to get my hair done a specific amount of times per month. I had to wear very specific clothing. I had to make sure that I wore makeup, like a full face. I don't wear makeup. I'm not a makeup person, but I had to make sure I wore a full face of makeup. I had to have my nails done. And I remember just at the time just being like...
And I'm assuming they weren't going to be paying you for any of that. No, of course. Okay.
That was just that was the beauty standard, right? I mean, it would be interesting if there was a, maybe a cis, male on reception, if they had the same sort of requirements. Probably not, but... You had to very much look a specific way, didn't you?
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like they're trying to cultivate an image.
Oh,
Yeah.
mm.
At least in my personal experience, it wasn't the other staff, it was the members.
Ooh.
Like, it was members, except for in one circumstance, it would be members literally walking up to me and telling me I was fat. And this is,
Wow.
and being like, oh, you have the gym right here, like, why aren't you exercising? Like, literally that.
Wow.
And as we all kind of end up being, which I'm totally fine with and don't see it as a negative, I was a lot smaller then than I am now, even before like all of my kind of stuff really kicked off.
Yeah, it's interesting what people's perception of what, fat is.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and it's just ridiculous. And there was also an incident because I kind of, like a lot of people who have an eating disorder, end up being with movement ends up being a duality. It's like they often is elements of, well, I'm actually enjoying movement, but there's also this other side that ED is like kind of more in control of, or perpetrating more, or has more motivations around. And I found that with my exercise, I definitely had that relationship with it. But it was so interesting. Like, there was this one, because I used to train quite hard at the time, quote unquote. And I remember one of the trainers like came up to me one time and was like, wow, like, you train really hard. Like, it's really impressive what you can lift. And then literally said, oh, you must, go out on the weekend and like drink a lot or eat a lot or whatever, because, otherwise you wouldn't look the way you do. And this is what people would just say to me randomly. And as you can imagine, that really quite frankly fucked me up.
Absolutely. Fucking hell.
I'd like to meet the person who doesn't get affected by that constantly.
Yeah. Absolutely, especially if it's the constant messaging you're getting, like the comments that you get. Like, somebody might get that I remember I got that as a one-off, and I was very much not, I've always been in a privileged body size. And I remember I got that once of, I thought you would look different for the amount of training that you do. And I was like, almost lost, like, fucking hell. Like, and imagine that just constantly, like, in your workplace as well. Like, the environment that you kind of at this time belonged, inverted commas, belonged in.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. It is crazy. So, like, I guess the last part of this story really is, because I don't know if it's as beneficial to go into the fuckery, but
go into whatever fuckery you want. We love fuckery, so please.
But basically what kind of happened soon after that, I was a receptionist for a couple of years. I worked in this gym overall for like over about 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
In different positions. And partway through, I was like, well, I want to be a PT. And I was thinking about maybe studying EP at university, and kind of all that was sort of coming together after kind of being in the gym. So I'm actually grateful in some weird ways, because if I had never been in that gym, I would have never been where I am right now. I would have never chosen the career that I did, and I love my job. But the decision to become a PT, I had all of these really extreme connotations around, because of my experiences even being in the gym environment. I was like, well, I'm going to have to look a certain way, or no one is going to want to train with me. Like, they're going to just laugh at me. They're going to think I'm a joke, and they're not going to take me seriously. And that's when it really went like completely off the road. Because I was really, really driven by that. And then as soon as I started losing weight very rapidly, because I was in a gym environment all the time, I felt like the amount of gratification that I got around it was a lot more than what the average person gets, because I was in that kind of context where that is so fixated on constantly as well. And so it very, very quickly became a very, very, very big problem. And unfortunately, it's just one of those things where, as it always does, it always starts off being like, whoa, this is fantastic. Oh my God, I'm so cool and in control of everything. And
all
then
of a sudden, next minute,
slowly, next minute, you're like, oh, I want to die.
What the fuck has happened?
Narrator, they were not in control.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they were never in control.
Go figure.
Yeah. The other fucked up part of that whole kind of being in that industry was everyone was always on a diet. Like every PT was on a diet. Everyone was bringing their broccoli and fucking rice into the fridge, and like it was this whole thing. And it was so normalized as well that I actually, unfortunately, again, like a lot of people who have eating disorders or have had that lived experience, there were a small handful of times early on I did reach out to help for help. Oh, it might make me a little emotional, but that's okay. Like I'm okay with it making me emotional.
Okay.
And it's like, I wonder, it's like, well, what if that was just a different experience? Like, what if it just was what if that response was just slightly different? Like, and, one of the ones that sticks out to me is I reached out to one of the female personal trainers that worked with me, and I told her what was happening, and she just said, that's just normal.
Oh God.
And it was just broke me, because I was like, well, what am I supposed to do?
I'm in pain. Yeah.
And
I'm in pain.
Yeah, and unfortunately, again, and this one just just fuels my fire now as like an adult human being who's more functional, which is like going to doctors and then being like, you don't look like you have an eating disorder, and this is only when I'm like, what would be considered like straight size, let alone for poor people who are in plus size bodies, like reaching out in those moments, to medical professionals. It just like, it genuinely just makes me so upset.
Yep. Because it's like, as somewhere along the way, we've just forgotten the fact that, and I say this to my clients so often, an eating disorder is a mental illness. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it has physical ramifications, sometimes, and that doesn't even mean weight loss. Like, it's not the way it manifests for some people as well. Like, it's a mental illness. And I don't know where along the line we've forgotten that.
Yeah.
If your brain and your mental state is in anguish, and, you can't function without this thing in your brain taking over and being in complete control, it doesn't matter what your body looks like, because like that's what an eating disorder is. And it's just wild. I mean, it's a society that we live in that has just, we hyper focus on bodies, and that's like, validation for some people's pain. But it's just, I have goosebumps as you were saying that, because it's just such a problem, and it's so perpetuated in every part of our society, media, everywhere.
Do you need a minute, Ellen? Are you okay?
No, I'm good.
Oh, cool.
You might.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing.
No,
yeah.
That's fine. I'm just a crier. I'm a chronic crier.
Same.
Honestly, like
I have a good cry maybe at least 2 times a day. Like,
perfect.
Got to get it out.
I think people listening, to the emotion behind it as well, I think it just adds so much more to the message.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. It's why I'm actually so passionate about, like, my space isn't huge, but I'm so passionate about having somewhere people can go to escape this shit, because it's disgusting and it's prolific. Is that how you say that word? It's just everywhere, and it is so, and I can tolerate it because I, in essence, grew up in a gym. Like, I can go into a commercial gym and it doesn't bother me at all, because that's just like, I was there for like so long. It's just, that's just how it rolls.
Like desensitized a bit.
I'm just desensitized, yeah. But it's I can just, knowing the experiences that I had, I know that it's just, people need alternative options. Most people, and I say this to like most people, it's just like, I'm a big believer, based on my own personal experiences and what I've seen being in gym culture and also being outside of gym culture, gyms suit 5 to 10% of the population at most. At max. 90% of people do not belong in gyms and do not want to be in gyms, but feel like they have to be in gyms because that's the only acceptable solution.
What's the alternative? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's kind of seen as like, that's what you do to be healthy, right? Healthy, inverted commas. That's what you do. That's just what you do.
Yes.
You couldn't pay me enough money to step foot into a gym, to be honest.
But at the same time as well, you're saying, okay, this is what you need to do. If a person needs to be healthy, they need to go to the gym and they have to work out and train hard. But they make gyms quite expensive. They don't make clothes to fit the people that apparently need to go to those gyms, and they make the culture inside the gym toxic and oftentimes dangerous. Like, you're having these people, I've read Aubrey Gordon's books, and she talks about how she gets, how she had photos taken of her at the gym, behind it, like in secret, like secretly taking photos of her so people can mock her. It's ridiculous. And I mean, that is definitely not an isolated story. And and if it's not like open harassment, it's covert sort of judgment or comments or stares or things like that. It's microaggressions or just full-on aggressions. So it's like, oh yeah, you have to go do this thing in this place, but we're going to make accessing that place really hard and a really tough and a traumatic experience for a lot of people. And I say that as someone who loves the gym, go there so many times a week. It's my jam. I love it. I'm one of those 5%. And even I can recognize when I see people in the gym, like looking at other people, I was like, just get on with your own business. Just leave people alone.
Or on the flip side, I find then, like, if they're not doing that, they like to turn particular bodies into like, oh, they're so inspiring. Oh, good on you for being at the gym. Or, like, do you know what I mean? Oh. And it's like, just fucking let people live.
Yeah, there's a baseline assumption that all people who are like in larger bodies are in the gym to lose weight.
Exactly.
Like, and that there's no other possibility that they could be there. And that's where the good fatty thing comes in. It's like, oh, good for you. Like, you're
exactly
here.
right.
Like, oh my God, you're doing something. Yes. It's just like, shut up.
Yeah.
If that's your body, but you're healthy, then it's okay.
Yeah. And gyms like, I know because I worked in sales in a commercial gym for quite a while. I'm aware of all their little sneaky tactics, and they actually use like the bedrocks of like motivational interviewing to basically bully people into feeling really shit about themselves, and then to kind of buy, basically. And it's just disgusting. And it was so interesting when I first started, like when I ever first did my first motivational interviewing course, I was like, oh fuck, all of this is feeling like really familiar. And I'm just like,
how dare they weaponize it?
I
love motivational interviewing. They're weaponizing
it. They were, and it was just disgusting because it was literally like, what's your ideal version of yourself? And like, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 on like, this is your ideal, like skinny, like, oh my God, doing all this stuff. And, oh, you're telling me you're only a 1? It's just like, it was just so manipulative and so disgusting.
I remember a while back. So I'm a mum, and mummy kind of culture with weight loss and stuff is really toxic. But
that's a whole other episode.
It's a whole other episode. But a while back, I was looking because I haven't been to the gym in a very long time, or like chronic health conditions makes me sort of unable to exercise at the moment. But I started to look at kind of wanting to go back to it, and this woman on Facebook, like one of these mum groups that I'm on in the area that I live in, was sort of saying that she had a home gym and she was looking at doing sort of like mums and bubs classes, which I was really interested in, because one of the big barriers, I guess, for mums is to being able to move their bodies is, what do I do with my child? It's actually really complicated, and I'm not going to get up earlier in the morning to go because I'm freaking tired. And if my child is sleeping, then in the morning I'm not getting up earlier just to go move, because I'm going to take that opportunity to either sleep or, God forbid, shower. And I'm sure that more in inverted commas motivated fitness mums might, no, you get up early and blah, blah, blah. Anyway,
the Rachel Hollises of the world. Get up at 5 a.m.
Oh my God, like, oh, honestly, if you're motivated, you'll do it. But I'm not motivated because I'm fucking tired. Where I'm going with this is this woman, posted on this Facebook group that, she has this home gym and she's looking at doing these classes, and, messaged me if you're interested. And I was like, oh, you know what? Like, that could be cool, because then, she has an area all the kids can sort of play together and I can actually do some movement. Like, that might sound, that might be okay. So I messaged her and she messaged me back, and sort of her marketing was basically like, what are your goals? How much weight do you want to lose? And I'm like, actually, I want to lose no weight. Like, if anything, like, that's not my goal. I just want to move because it makes me feel good. I don't really get much chance to these days. Like, and as soon as I got that, I was just like, oh my God, like, why is that your automatic, like, she knows nothing about me. Like, you have no idea what my history is. No, but that's just the kind of the assumed, what is your body composition goals? And it's like, well, actually nothing. I just want to move because, I'm a mum and I'm tired and this like sounded like it would suit me.
And also the danger of her saying that to you with your history. And imagine if you weren't in such a comfortable and, I don't want to say stable, but less risky position. Could you imagine if she said that to the wrong person and then that triggered relapse?
Yeah, absolutely. And there would be a lot of mums that, that would trigger, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it's not...
It's just ridiculous.
Because you're in an extremely emotional, fragile state post-childbirth.
Yeah. And tired and just, neurologically just...
Hormonally, everything.
At times fucked up.
Sleep deprived,
So,
yeah. Again, this could be an entire episode, and I'm sure it will be.
We will do an episode on that. We won't turn this into that. So I guess, how has this lived experience influenced and informed your practice as an exercise physiologist? I kind of want to can we get into that?
Yeah. I know you touched on a little bit, but I'd love to get into...
I want to actually get into it now and sort of this space is just, fascinating.
Let's do it. So I think it kind of naturally kind of follows on a bit from what I was just saying, but I didn't, again, like a lot of people, I didn't find a psychologist that I found was helpful to my recovery until my third attempt. And my third attempt was my last attempt. Like, I had said to myself, I'm like, this doesn't work out, then I'm out. Like, I'm gone. Like, just not doing it anymore. But I was lucky that the person who I found was amazing. She really was different, and I can kind of now as a clinician see that her approach was much more person-centered, much more collaborative. And also the dietitian, I'd never seen a dietitian before, and the dietitian I ended up seeing was also very not about food, which I really liked and really helped.
Love it.
Really, really helped me with seeing things in a very different way. I don't think and I only saw her 3 times before she moved on, but she was the best dietitian I'd ever seen in any of my treatment, and she just in those 3 sessions, she made such a difference. It was crazy. I felt like she was one of the first people who really actually met me, where I was.
Oh.
And I hadn't really had that. And it was beautiful. I reminisce on that a lot. I'm like, oh.
I love it. And it's wild to me because I just feel like, the way I practice, that's at the core of the way that I practice. And for that not to be at the core of the way people practice is just blows my mind. The reason why we do what we do is because of the people that we're helping.
100%.
And they are at the core. It's just wild that it could be any different. We know it is for so many, but yeah.
For sure. And I kind of started, and this is still when I was a PT, but I was at university and studying EP at the time, working as PT. And I started to really kind of notice more the cognitive dissonance between what I was learning in recovery versus what I was teaching to my clients. And I also started to notice my eating disorder everywhere, just qualities of my eating disorder in people as they talked about themselves and discussed what they wanted. And I was just this is all very fucked. And I started and at this time I didn't know about size inclusive care being a thing. I didn't know that HAZE was a thing. I had no other people around me in the community, but I was okay, I'm just going to try and not be a dick now.
I like that. I'm just going to try not to be a dick.
Look, if more people took that on and used it as sort of a guide in life.
I need that on a shirt. It's gonna become one of my informing kind of frameworks for my practice.
Yeah.
We just try not to be dicks.
Yeah, exactly. It's just that's it. That's all you got to do.
I mean, it's in a nutshell. Yeah.
If everyone kind of used that as a guiding compass, our world would be a better place.
Yeah, 100%. And also, I would say over 90% of people coming to a PT in a commercial gym are looking for weight loss. And so...
I mean, that's what they market for, right?
Yes, exactly. So I tried to start, and basically my approach was yes and, basically, is how I sort of understand it now. It's like, okay, yes, we want weight loss and that's fine. But can we add something else? Like, what else is important to you?
That is cool.
Um, and so I started kind of going down that lens and kind of developing that kind of approach, plus like trying to understand for the first time in my life, just trying to understand genuinely why. Like, why do they want this? Like, why is weight loss important? Like, what is underneath this desire that is really real and really important to this person? And how can I better serve them? Like understanding that motivation. And so I was trying to sort of view it. I kind of can look back at it now and see that it was a like a harm reduction strategy is what I would call it now, because you would have a lot of people presenting in a commercial gym setting, kind of what you just shared about your mum and bubs group, where it's like you have these people who are just at a point in the edge, and just the wrong thing could just really send them over. And I hope that maybe I did a lot of harm as a personal trainer, and I have to be the first person to really acknowledge that. I can look back and see very clearly the harm that I caused when I did not know better. But I hope that in my time I was there, I was able to provide some support by just saying, hey, like, I understand that you want weight loss, but if you focus on this really intensely right now, you've told me you've tried this 6 or 7 times previously. If we go at this really hard out the gate, it's probably not going to be sustainable. So can we focus on just doing some regular movement? Like, how does that sound to you? And trying to just not, which I don't agree with. Some people do, but I don't agree with dismissing people's weight loss goals, because
I agree.
I agree as well.
They're valid, and they come from real places of
look at the society we live in.
And yeah, exactly. Like, there's real reasons people want these things. But hopefully creating a safer environment than saying, well, what I used to do, which was like, well, here's MyFitnessPal. Start tracking, like jump on the scale. Let's start weighing you every week. Like, all that kind of stuff. How many things can I really remove so that I can still like hold space for the weight loss goal, but try and also fill the cup with other stuff that might provide some enjoyment and resilience for if this goes wrong for this person. So it's not their all or nothing.
Almost like you're working from a person-centered framework.
Yeah, I had no idea what that was at the time.
Which is just a testament to you, really. Like, as you were just saying all of that, I was just thinking, like, you weren't really taught these things. Like, that wasn't really what you were taught in your PT. I don't know, EP at uni, if you were really taught any of this stuff. How incredible that you've sort of just taken that off your own bat. Like, recognize, hey, this doesn't really sit well with me. This doesn't really align with my, my values and my ethics and stuff like that. And I mean, like I said, like, that's very much person-centered care, and you didn't know what that was at the time, but yet you were doing it. Like, that's fucking incredible.
Yeah, it's awesome that was so intuitive to you. And I think also,
intuitive.
I wonder if also maybe that dietitian who clearly had such a huge impact on you, the way that they treated you and the care that you received, you almost wanted to mimic that. Do you think there could be part of that involved as well?
I definitely look back at university was very prescriptive in its kind of way of doing things, like a lot of medical things are. And I became quite a combative individual, because I was just like, nah, I'm not really vibing with this kind of whole situation.
Totally, yeah.
And we also didn't get, like, just while we're on this note, like, I didn't get any lectures, not like even one lecture about eating disorders at university.
So common, isn't it? Like, I feel like so many degrees where there should be that, there just is not.
How?
Yeah. I don't know.
Because Ash, it doesn't matter. Don't complicate it. Come on.
Yeah, at bare minimum, like, I feel like you should know and I've had this is a side rant. I'm sorry.
Please, we
It's
love
a
side
tangent.
rants. We love tangents. Do it. We'll join you.
One of my favorite tangent rants to have with, first of all, I'm very privileged. I just need to say this sort of before I say the other thing, that I don't work in any environments anymore that require me to work actively with like gen pop people wanting to lose weight. Like I don't kind of include eating disorders, because people who are navigating eating disorders, like it's part of their kind of clinical thing, right? So it's not really the same. So I don't really work with any people who are just like, oh, weight loss is my only fitness goal kind of stuff. And it's often the kind of thing that's, you know, most EPs are dealing with, or on most GP referrals and all of that kind of stuff. And so I've had a lot of talks with a lot of EPs about, well, how do we, because we were never taught to do this, how do we screen for eating disorders in a setting that with people who are pursuing weight loss? Because if the person is pursuing weight loss and you, the provider, do not screen in any way whatsoever, then how, like, you're being negligent, in my personal opinion, because you could be pushing this person further down the path. A lot of people, as both of you would know, who have eating disorders will present to PTs for weight loss, or EPs for weight loss, because of like comorbidities and stuff like that, and won't disclose. I feel like there should be education on, like, okay, we're not saying people can't lose weight, because I don't believe that's true, but let's look at like actually making sure people are safe to do so, and presenting that information to the person and saying, look, this is what I've noticed. These are my concerns as your clinician. I understand that you have these desires and I really want to hold space for that, but I want to give you this information before we proceed. What are your thoughts on this? So that we can actually like have that conversation and also have it out in the open, because there's nothing worse than dealing with things that you don't know are there. So
and also the person might actually be like, feel relieved as well, like somebody's actually noticed, somebody's picked up on something. If you work with human bodies, then you need to screen for eating disorders, essentially. I believe like it's across the board. Like I think of, you know, PTs, like, you know, you like this story I just said before of, you know, that woman just messaging me saying, you know, what do you know, weight loss goals or body composition goals, like she, like, that's so wildly unethical and dangerous. Like it needs to be a standard. If you are working with human bodies, then you are working with eating disorders across the board. And you might not think that you are, but you are. And it might be the person that, you know, is one of your best clients, or, you know, wins member of the month, or, you know, 100%. Whatever.
Or like, most active member, you've been to the gym 33 times this month and there's only 30 days in the month. Like, guys, come on.
And it's just, it's wild. It's across it. Like, I think, you know, not to bring the whole motherhood thing back into it, but like, I think of obstetric. I can't even freaking say the word. What is it?
Obstetrics?
Yeah, there we go. Fucking hell. I think, you know, like so many areas, we just do not screen for eating disorders, and we need to be. But there's no tool to do so, and we're not taught that.
No, like I've had to give, there isn't a direct tool, and like I've encouraged when EPs have like asked me about it, I've encouraged them to like look at weight cycling history. So ask them like, you know, how long have you been dieting for? Or when was your last diet? Like, how did that go? How did that make you feel? Like asking some questions around that, like just kind of, not even like dieting. Yeah, I think the dieting history can actually give you the best input, because you can kind of come at it from a perspective for that person that feels like a normal question that someone would ask you if you wanted to lose weight. Like, what's worked for you before, or what have you tried before, and what did that look like, and when did that start? Because even if the person doesn't have a eating disorder, if they've, you know, been dieting on and off since, you know, the age of 12, then that's a risk factor to me.
And you need to be aware of that.
Yes, exactly. And they need to be aware it's a risk factor too, so that they can make an informed decision about what they're doing.
And I think also, like, we need to not just be looking at eating disorders, right? We need to be looking at disordered eating as well, and exercise addiction, because they can be just as haunting as an eating disorder. You know, for many people, it might be that their disordered eating actually is an eating disorder, it just hasn't been diagnosed or picked up on because it's been, you know, glorified or whatever for whatever reason. But also, you know, like exercise addiction in isolation and, you know, extreme dieting and weight cycling and, you know, disordered eating in isolation is also just as important to address and pick up on.
100%.
And like, it's so normalized, isn't it? Especially within the gym culture. You know, like I saw an Instagram story of somebody the other day, you know, putting up like, you know, how did I go from this body to this body? And, you know, her beginning body was very fit and privileged. She did CrossFit, so it was, you know, very much a typical kind of, I guess, muscular kind of CrossFit type body. And then she decided that she wanted to have abs, and so then, you know, how did I go from this to this? And she's you know, what exercises to do? No exercises. It was restricting my food. It was limiting my food. I started eating less. And then at the end of it, she was like, and it really sucks, but, you know, but I get this body because of doing that. And it's like, I just felt so sad. Like, I just felt like that was just such a normal and fine thing for her to say. And it's just like, that is fucked up.
Yeah, it is.
Like,
it is.
And so many people have that thought process. Like, it's fine. It's just what we do. Like, you know, we track everything to, you know, the meticulous kind of gram. It doesn't matter how it impacts my life because this is my life. And it's like, that sucks. Like, that's so fucked up. How sad.
That's you always are so good at segueing into new topics, Callie. Because something I definitely want to...
I don't even know what topic I've just segued into, but I'm excited now.
One thing I definitely wanted to ask, like on that, is I know one thing that you're quite passionate about, Ellen, is, you know, especially when we were discussing you coming on this podcast, was practical tips for people to take away. And I think in this very slippery slope between restrictive eating, exercise addiction, and how these things don't happen overnight, they slowly build up. So I was wondering if you could talk about what are some of the warning signs that people can look for when their relationship with exercise and movement, because I know that that's another thing. What are the warning signs when that can become unhealthy and unhelpful and something that you can pick up on and say, okay, I think I might have an issue here?
Yeah, for sure. I might just put a disclaimer up first. And the disclaimer is that there are lots of ways that, you know, an unhealthy relationship with movement can emerge. It's not just compulsive exercise, which I feel like is the main, or like exercise addiction, as kind of Cal said. Like, I feel like that is the most prominent thing we kind of hear about, where it's like, oh, like, you know, compulsive and obsessive exercise. But there's lots of different ways that it can show up, and that is still kind of like quite unhealthy and can be quite detrimental and impactful to the person's quality of life. And just often it's not as common as people think to have like seriously high levels of like obsessive compulsive exercise. Like, it definitely happens, but I think the other ones happen a lot more commonly than this one. So I just wanted to say that before.
I'm very glad you mentioned that, because that was, I did plant a little seed being like, and talk about the other parts too. So I'm so glad you're going to talk about it, which is great.
So a common one that people don't think about is mood dependence. So if you start thinking, if you need the gym to feel good, and it is the one thing that is like, oh yeah, I have to go to the gym because it's the only thing that makes me feel good. And then you notice almost like withdrawal symptoms when you're not going to the gym, and that can look different for everyone, then that is a problem. The gym should not be the sole thing in your life that makes you feel good about yourself or makes you happy. No. So I think that's a very common one that people don't think about very often. Another one, again, I'm just going to go with the ones that are a bit more subtle first, that people might not think about as much. Another big one, which I see a lot in the kind of gym bro environment, but also just for the average person, is the desire to having to up all the time, up the movement. So I'm just going to give like a broad example. Let's say you're going into the gym and you did squats with 10 kilos in week 1 for 10 reps. Like, you need to come in and you have to do more. You feel like you're compelled to do 12.5 kilos.
And like you're failing if you haven't increased.
Yes. Like you can't stay, you can't do less, you can't kind of intuitively listen. It's like, no, I have to push more. I have to do more than I did last time. So that one's quite important because you sort of, I see that a lot in people getting frustrated where they're like, well, I can't do what I did last time. And it's like, you shouldn't be able to. Like, performance is, there are so many, and this would be a whole other podcast, but there are so many factors that impact performance, and the average person kind of doesn't have, and this is actually a quick side note, something I'm very passionate about teaching people is actually like the basic exercise science, basically, where it's like, let's actually learn how exercise works on a physiological level so that you understand why this is a crack of shit.
I love that so much. I love it so much. And because you can't fight fact.
Yeah, exactly.
People try to, but we can't.
This is literal science. Like, this is in textbooks. Like, I can hand you a textbook and you can read this, like, right from the page. Like, but yeah, so that one's important. Another one would be like starting to become very rigid with your exercise. So and I associate rigidity with like rules, basically. So kind of like, well, I exercise at exactly this time, like every single week, for exactly this many exercises at exactly this many weights, and I have to do 20 crunches and not one more and not one less, and like, you know, any kind of rules that you're starting to make around exercise that are also very rigid and fixed in terms of like when you do them and how you do them.
Or like, you know, I must exercise before I eat breakfast, or, you know,
exactly.
I think there's, you know, the whole movement, like, you know, I cannot eat in the morning until I go for a walk, or stuff like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or if I don't go and exercise this one day, that I have to change everything else about my day, or I have to change how I eat, or I can't eat that now because I haven't gone to the, done the exercise.
Yeah. Rules.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was actually going to lead into next, which is like kind of tied to rigidity, but it's still its own thing, which is like just compensatory behavior. So like going like, oh, I just ate this cake, and feeling like you need to go to the gym to like exercise it off or whatever,
or to earn it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like all of that kind of stuff. I think that just a random add in would be that often dysfunctional exercise habits, like the ones that I'm kind of mentioning now, are also the first presenting signs of an eating disorder. Like, yeah, unhelpful exercise habits are often the first presenting and the last remaining in terms of eating disorder recovery. And so this kind of stuff is actually really important to sort of be aware of and to be kind of screening for in the people that you're working for if you're an exercise professional, because it could really be a sign of something that could be developing that you could do an early intervention on and it just not go down that path. Another big one would be like guilt and shame around not sticking to the routine. An important point as well is that unhelpful exercise or dysfunctional exercise, whatever you want to call it, is about the quality, not the quantity of exercise that you're doing. You could be exercising an hour a week, but if you're exhibiting some of this stuff, it's not helpful. It doesn't have to be exercise every day or exercising for multiple hours for it to be unhelpful. And I will say that probably the guilt and the shame is the most common thing that I see because of the culture and the way it is around exercise. I don't think that I meet anyone who doesn't have an unhealthy starting point to their exercise when I meet them in my work for the first time. Even if it's small stuff, like the amount of guilt and shame people feel about not moving is just so intense because the culture has really done a very good job of doing a lot of people blaming rather than like the responsibility is on the individual. It's not on the system to change. And so we have a whole bunch of people feeling paralyzed, feeling like they can't engage in activity because activity only looks like a certain thing, and then they're not getting any of the health benefits that they might want from movement because they are paralyzed in the choice that they're making, or they feel like they have to do something that they can't sustain for very long, or they do it and then develop like other stuff as a result of it. So yeah.
So I know you spoke about how overexercise can often be almost the first signs of an eating disorder. And I think we hear it so often in eating disorder recovery and treatment of no exercise, prioritize physical health, weight restoration, if that's applicable to you, and or medical stability. And this idea of like no exercise until you're cleared to do it. And I think a lot of people can get really scared to almost reintroduce exercise back into their life. And because a lot of people do just want to have a healthy relationship with movement. And we know that, movement can be good for you. I think people can be really scared to reintroduce it. So what role can exercise play in the process of recovery, and how can people return to movement safely?
Oh my God. Do we have an extra hour?
We should have started with this question.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. We're going to try and do a speed run. So I kind of need to state at the start of this that exercise is not bad. Even in eating disorder recovery, exercise is not bad. Exercise is helpful. Exercise has health benefits. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, clinical management of eating disorders set all of these barriers that you have to tick in order to be able to be allowed to exercise, as you mentioned. And they're very considerate of like the physical risk of potentially engaging in exercise, but it's kind of at a cost to the psychological relationship that person has with exercise. Because what you're doing is, as you've just said, like teaching someone that exercise is bad, and they might have all of these other, like the things that we just discussed, right? They might have all of those things happening and going on to some level. And all you're doing is putting that on pause and saying, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to address that. We're not going to look at that. No, none of it. And then what often happens, unfortunately, is they go through, because there's not many EPs who kind of do some of the more ED related work. They get to a point where their dietitian or treatment team is like, yep, you're medically stable. Yep, like, you're on weight restoration trajectory. Off you go. And they just throw them to the wind. They're like, bye. And they're just left there to do whatever. When they had all this stuff that just got put on pause, and then we're just, what? I find that whole concept is really bizarre to me.
Yeah. And it kind of like intensifies during that time as well, because I guess, if that is a problem for somebody, then, they're going to be thinking about it anyway. Or like, I know, and I don't want to put ideas into people's heads, but I know that even, if you go into every hospital room, I can guarantee you would find a lot of people still exercising.
For sure. And this is the other, this is like, well, exactly. Like, this is the other thing, right, to me. There's two elements I'll discuss on that topic. The first is like, a lot of the time, exercise is a coping mechanism for people with eating disorders, and you're taking away a coping. If you're someone who's preaching abstinence, you're taking away a coping mechanism from someone before they have something to replace it with. So what's that going to do to that person, right? And you're often doing it not in consultation with that person, not in agreement with that person. It's a decision that's kind of made for them. And the other factor, they'll just do it anyway, which is literally why we have guidelines for this sort of stuff.
That was in air quotes, by the way, for anyone who can't see.
Inverted commas guidelines.
Yes,
inverted commas.
which I think have some useful information in them. But for me, if someone was seeing me and they were medically unstable and they were compulsively exercising all the time, I would want to have an actual proper conversation about what is realistic for them and why they're actually in my office in the first place. They obviously have some concern. What is that concern, and how can I help them with that? Because it's more pertinent for me to actually know how much exercise they're actually doing than for them to pretend like they're not doing any exercise. And like I feel like that's such a thing that's sort of missed in the exercise field at the moment in this area, in terms of not making exercise a secretive activity, because just that in itself is creating a poorer relationship with exercise, this thing that has to be done in secret, not seen, like all of this kind of stuff. And as I sort of mentioned before, that, all of these signs like around exercise can be like the predeterminer before an eating disorder and the thing that's left. Because it's often, and this is the thing that's really important, why you should work to address these sort of like things if you have the resources available to you, is that because the risk of relapse is so high, like if you have a unhealthy relationship with exercise, you can go through the whole process of like doing all the psych stuff, doing all the dietetics and being like in a strong recovery. And if that component isn't looked at all, it can be a very strong indicator of relapse. I think from memory, it's like there's 50 primary relapse indicators, and I think this is number 2. I think it's only second. I think it's only second to not having good social support. So it's very, very high, which is why I'm not a fan of people just going abstinence, because it's too big of an issue to kind of just sweep it under the rug for a year or more and go, we'll deal with that later. Or for dietitians, not to throw them under the rug, to be like, oh, let's use exercise as a little carrot for you to eat more.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no.
That was, yeah, I guess I'm just interested because I was in the camp of like, yeah, like if you're medically compromised, then you really need to not be. And if you're not eating enough, then you need to not be exercising. But we like just from the conversation or what you've just said then is like, of course, it makes so much sense that you can't just take that away and just leave that on the sidelines to address, you know, maybe when you are medically stable, because my experience was you're going to exercise anyway. They're going to find a way to do it anyway. I'd love to talk about, I guess, you know, when somebody is medically unstable, how do we sort of navigate that then if, you know, they come into your door and that's kind of the scenario that's sitting in front of you?
Yeah, sure. I think that this one's actually quite easy to answer.
Great, good.
People, we just classify people into 2 different categories: people who are willing to modify their exercise and people who can't. We know that movement is safe to do when you're medically unstable. Depends on the level of movement we're talking about. So it tends to be more lower intensity movement. But you can still do a lot of different things. It's just not like bloody slamming yourself into a wall and like going ham and going all out. Like we're talking about keeping things like probably at 50% of like max exertion from like a technical perspective. And it also kind of depends on what your like medically, like what area you're not medically stable in as well. Like if you've got cardiac factors, we might be more considerate around like aerobic based stuff. It might be very limited to like, you know, 30 minutes of walking or, you know, something like that rather than, you know, other things. But you can still lift light weights. You can still do stuff there's lots of options. Like Alana made like an amazing list for me once where she was like, all of these things for low intensity that are like community based. I'm like, amazing. This is great.
I love it. Yeah.
Alana is another exercise physiologist who will be joining us on the podcast very soon. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
She's great. So there isn't a situation in my mind. Like I've worked with people who are even like, you know, like they're in an inpatient setting, and we've just been doing some light stretching in bed and some light mobilization because like being bedridden is fucked. Like, can we just all agree on that?
Awful.
And really uncomfortable as well.
It's traumatizing.
It literally is disgusting. So can we not allow these people to bloody like at least do something to move their body?
Like some dignity?
Yeah, exactly. It's actually not like psychologically helpful for these people to be trapped in a bed not doing anything. So that's a whole other issue.
I can just think back to when I had COVID. I was pretty much, you know, I locked myself into my bedroom pretty much to keep myself from getting, getting Adam sick. And I remember just lying there for days straight and I was going mad. I actually had pains in my legs from lying down so much and like pains in my legs and pains in my back. And I was just I was going crazy to the point where, yes, I was coughing and I was sick. I had COVID, but I felt like I needed to move and do something. So I actually went outside
100%.
and did like yoga, and I hate yoga. I can't do it. I find it so boring.
I'm
But
with
I
you
was just
there.
like,
Yeah.
I need
What
something.
a move. Exactly.
I need something that is not low intensity, because obviously yoga can be really
Yeah.
intensive as well. But I needed something, a light movement, light stretching, just something to get me moving.
Yeah.
Because human bodies are meant to just not be bedridden the whole time.
100%. Yeah, I agree.
I remember when I was, I was unwell with my eating disorder. I was actually, so a thing that I really loved doing that really, and I had insomnia kind of during those times as well. And every morning, like, I'd be awake most of the night, but I'd kind of get to a point in the morning where I'd be like, okay, it's a kind of an acceptable hour that I can get up and go to the beach. And I only lived like probably 100 meters from the beach. And so I'd go to the beach and take my book, sometimes go for a swim and then walk home. I remember during a period that I was actually banned from doing that. I wasn't allowed to walk to the beach, and I wasn't allowed to swim even. I wasn't, the beach for me was just, water for me is, for my trauma and everything, is just so healing. And, it's kind of like my grounding thing that I can do. And I remember I wasn't allowed to do that. And I remember just finding that just so like, probably more like traumatizing, because I was like, but I like, the beach is my thing. Like, I felt like I just had so much taken off me already. And, but I knew that I could go to the beach. And when I dived in and went under the waves, I knew I kind of just felt almost a little bit alive. And when I had that taken off me, it was just like, well, fuck, like, like, what, well, I guess I'll just lie here. Like, it was really actually quite traumatizing for me. It was awful.
Yeah. That sounds, I'm just so sorry you had that experience, because for me, it's like very clear hearing that's actually, when I look at movement, I look at positive or negative impacts, and it's like weighing up the risk reward of those things. And for me, that's like a net positive, because you're saying it's grounding, you're allowing for mindfulness, it's allowing you to connect to yourself. That's a net positive in terms of like the kind of, relationship we're trying to build in recovery, and even just giving you some of your life back temporarily while you're fucking going through what you were going through. It's just, I guess maybe zooming out a little bit more than just looking at people who are medically unstable, I don't believe that movement should be taken away from people without consultation with them, like, and actually figuring out what is and isn't viable for them. Because if someone sat in front of me and was like, I need to walk to the beach because it's the only thing I have left, I'd be like, fuck yeah, let's go to the beach. Because it's, why wouldn't, like, there's no net negative here, there's always like maybe like a little like physical risk, you could say, but like you've got to risk, like, weigh up everything else, like what is going to happen at the end of the day.
Mentally, right? Like what's the mental risk here compared to the physical risk, right?
100%,
Yeah.
100%. And that's why I think that too often, like, the physical side of things is really, really stressed in terms of the exercise component, and the psychological, like, relationship with movement, or the psychological benefits that exercise and movement can have for someone, are completely overlooked.
Yep. I guess exercise physiology as a profession within a treating team for eating disorders, like, this is a very, I guess, new thing. It is just so needed, because the history, I guess, of treatment has always kind of been, the psychiatrist, GP, dietitian, psychologist kind of team, and it is so needed. You are the expert in this area, and I think we need to be including folk like you into eating disorder teams. And I hope that starts infiltrating the space.
So do I. I hope that, like, my dream is that EP is included on the eating disorder treatment plan someday. That would be cool.
Are you finding that people are becoming kind of receptive of it? Are you finding that, you are sort of being brought into a lot of teams, or like where do you think it's at the moment, and where do you hope it goes?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think that there are some clinicians who have been forced to play the role of the exercise advisor, who aren't EPs. have been kind of maybe not necessarily reluctant, but I've had to sort of like go in with what their expectations are of exercise and kind of fit in collaboratively with the client and the other people in the team who already have their kind of expectations around what exercise should or shouldn't look like for that person, which can be a bit more challenging. But at the end of the day, they're also like still like welcoming that. Most of the time I have like a team member reach out to me and say like, hey, like I have this client and I think they need help with movement. It's less often that the people who are navigating the eating disorder like reach out to me directly. So that's kind of always interesting. Because the problem is as well is like you can't really just refer to just like a random EP either, because like a lot of the training that I've done is been like lived experience in the space, and also with like learning from other people who are in the space and like collaborating directly with them on challenging cases so that I can, you know, learn that way. But yeah, so I'm hoping that more EPs get into it and it's more kind of accepted more broadly by people and practitioners too. But I think it more suffers at the moment from lack of exposure than from people not being accepting.
Yeah. And I think so many other could be generalizing, but I think a lot of people also think that if you want to incorporate exercise, you think personal trainer, right?
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing.
I had a personal trainer when I was coming out of recovery, and I was very explicit with her, and I said, I don't want to be weighed. These are my goals. And she was actually great, but I know that was probably an exception, not the rule. But I think if I had this, like the service that you're offering, I think my relationship with exercise probably would have, you know, my journey back would have been a lot different and much more holistic. And I think, I mean, I still have issues like now, like unlearning a lot of the things about my relationship with exercise, right? Like the things that you were saying about guilt and shame of like not moving. I feel that sometimes. And I think, like you said, it's so common because that's what culture just tells us. I just want to wrap this up because I know that you have places to be. You're very important.
I wish we could keep you for another like few hours, but we won't.
I want, obviously, we've definitely talked on some practical tips already, but the floor is now yours in terms of what are some things that people can do to improve their relationship with movement. If you had like your top 3, what would they be?
Okay, that's difficult.
I was going to say, that's a really hard
I know, I'm sorry.
Holy shit.
I'm like, just summarize this whole thing in like 3
Just summarize your entire work and philosophy.
What if we thought it in the context of like eating disorders and like disordered eating, and like if we thought of in that sort of context, so you have somebody with like an eating disorder or disordered eating presentation, and this was kind of part of their presentation. Could we think of it in that context maybe? I don't know if that simplifies it a bit more.
Yeah, I can. I will just kind of like, again, put the broad feelers out of like, this is very general advice. And I'm just kind of going with this as like, generally, this would be something I would recommend most people do, whether they have an eating disorder or not, quite frankly. So the first thing is, do you enjoy what you do? And it doesn't even have to be enjoyment. It just has to be not hate. Do you just dread what you're doing right now? Do you absolutely hate it? And if you do, maybe stop doing that and do something else. I say it doesn't have to be full on enjoyment because, you know, that's hard for a lot of people, and that's a process. Enjoyment is a journey. For exercise,
it's a spectrum, right? You either hate that movement or you love it. You know, there's more than that.
There's the medium. Yeah, there's like, we want to just really avoid like hating and dread around exercise. Neutrality is great. Like, strive for neutrality. That's beautiful. And feel free to explore. Like, try stuff. You know, see what options you like.
So many different forms of movement outside of the gym. Like,
yeah, exactly. So just find out what feels good.
sorry, just on that, and like also different environments you can try that in. Like, again, not to talk about Aubrey Gordon yet again, but you know, she says she loves her rowing machine. She loves it. She thinks it links back to her childhood. It's like a ride, right? But she said she wants to do that in her home where she feels safe, not going to a gym and using the rowing machine. So like, yeah, like you said, not just find the movement that you love, but also doing it at a place that also makes you feel happy.
100%. I think the next one would probably be intention setting with your movement. So once you have something that you are at least neutral on, try and have an intention, like a purpose. Like, why am I doing this? And try and check in with yourself around that. Am I doing it because I feel like I have to do it? And if so, should you be doing it? Am I doing it because, you know, this is something that's important to me because I'm trying to manage X condition and that's part of this? Great. You know, like what is your intention? It doesn't have to be like a whole like positive thing. And there can be space there still for weight and shape concerns. I'm not saying like don't acknowledge that, but try and find some balanced intention to your exercise potentially if that feels like it's possible for you. And then the last thing maybe I'll leave on would just be around the intensity of the exercise. I think that too often, you know, in society, we're taught that exercise has to be like all or nothing, no pain, no gain, for it to be enough to have any effect on your body.
If you're not sweating, you're not working.
Yeah, exactly.
Of your heart rate. What does your Fitbit say?
Oh, no, fuck Fitbits. Everyone should
honestly. So like
half the time, one of my first recommendations to people is like who are tracking is, do we feel like we could stop tracking? How do you feel about that? Before I kind of make the final statement, I think it kind of just needs to have a little segment attached to it, which is that the body needs a lot less stimulus than you think to make adaptation. So the body works on a threshold mechanism. So let's say that like 50% is the threshold, and the more new to exercise you are, the lower the threshold is, by the way. So if you're currently not moving, the threshold is like just anything is actually enough. It's crazy. And the more trained you are, like if you've been, you know, exercising consistently for like 15 years, the more stimulus you need to kind of maintain or to kind of like make more progress if that's what you want. But when you start, all you need to do is cross the threshold. You don't need to be fucking up here doing 100%. That's actually not helpful to the body.
Again, it's a spectrum.
It is a spectrum. Everything's a spectrum. So on that note, just try and leave some in the tank. You know, do the movement and try and leave feeling not exhausted, not depleted. Like you've done a bit of movement, you're feeling it in your body, but it hasn't been everything you had. It didn't take everything from you. And
because you still have life to live for that day.
Like, I was just going to say that, yeah.
you still got like so, especially in eating disorder recovery, right? Like recovery is actually like freaking hard, and like, you know, for most people, like it's really like lame to say, but like a full-time job. And then like everything else that comes into your life as well, like life things. So like if you absolutely fuck yourself in the morning with, you know, what you're doing, like what have you got left for the day?
That's like mic drop moment, Ellen. Thank you so much. That like those 3 tips, I'm already being like, yep, I think everyone can take stuff away from what you're saying, not just people who have and live with eating disorders or have lived with eating disorders. I think those are really, it's kind of like a no-brainer. Just like you said, it's general advice for everybody, because I think we live in this world with so much pressure to do certain things. And I think you just nailed it. You're just awesome.
Thank you.
I agree.
Thank you so much for chatting with us, and we should definitely chat again soon. It has been so wonderful. For those who want more of Ellen and all things Ellen, you can follow them on Instagram at ellen.masson_EP, or you can follow their practice at your.movement.space, or go to their website, yourmovementspace.com.au. They are based in Kirribilli in Sydney, if anyone would like to reach out and utilise their very important services. And they also mentioned that they do a podcast. So if you want to listen to them...
Into the red zone.
Exactly. At into.the.red.zone, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts.
Highly recommend everybody go check all that stuff out because there's a lot of just really informative stuff there as well.
So that's all for today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can follow us on Instagram at paved_with_gold_pod. Send us a Gmail at... There's just so much dancing in the background. I'm loving it. I'm here for it.
We're doing joyful movement right
Joyful movement. Yes. All right. I'm going to join in. I'm going to do it as well.
You can follow wiggle arms.
You can follow us on Instagram at paved_with_gold_pod. Send us a Gmail at paved_with_gold_pod@gmail.com. I'm putting this on Instagram
the best
for sure.
Outro ever.
Or visit our website, pavedwithgoldpodcast.com. If you didn't catch any of that, which I do not blame you, you can catch the links in the show notes below, as well as extra resources.
I read something once of like stimming is only weird when you're doing it by yourself. I
concur. All right.
And I am so with it.
Until next time, stay safe and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
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 This podcast is general in nature and has not taken your personal circumstances or medical history into account. We are here to share our own experiences and the things that we have found helpful throughout our own personal recovery journeys. Please remember that each person's journey and circumstances are different, and not all of the information contained in this podcast may be relatable to you. It's important you consult your own GP or recovery team to seek out tailored advice before making any important decisions relating to your own health and recovery process. If you have found any of the content in this episode distressing, please contact your care team or a medical professional. If you or someone you know is in crisis and needs help now, please contact emergency services in your region immediately.